Go ahead and just
how
let me
it
know
always
this recorder is not working right. I'll work on it, and I'll just give you a nod when I'm done, but I think I'll get it.
All right, let's go ahead and get started with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, and I've asked Commissioner Johnson to give us a thought or legislative prayer, so I will turn the time over to him.
Thank you. Cori, is the YouTube thing running?
It is.
The kids are at home, so I just want to make sure they could. Yeah, thank you. I thought I'd take a little personal liberty on this this occasion. I wrote it down this time, a quote or an idea. As part of the lawmaking process, policymakers analyze the pros and cons of a given law. They try to weigh the likely advantages the law provides against the restrictions and costs that it may cause. It's kind of an exercise in probability. I think we've experienced this a few times. One that comes to mind was the B ordinance. I remember we went back and forth and we talked about what's going to be the issues we're trying to mitigate and what costs will that cause. And kind of went back and forth a little bit. When the objective of the law is to secure natural rights, this analysis is essential. When the objective of the law strays beyond the protection of those rights, I have come to the firm conviction that the best chance for achieving peace and prosperity is to pursue the cause of liberty. And what I mean by that is, as I weigh those probabilities and think, well, how good or how bad is that going to be? I've often come back to the point that sometimes it feels like, as a policymaker, I may be tempted, like I felt like in the B ordinance, perhaps the one vote I regretted on this body, to be honest, that perhaps I assume that I know more than I do. And so generally I try to restrict the scope of the law in this pursuit of the cause of liberty to resist the temptation of trading freedom for security, and to do so with rigor, respect, and retainability, i.e. make decisions that can last and not just be temporary. Anyway, and with that I'd also like to add a legislative prayer. Our dear Father in heaven, we are grateful that we can meet as a planning commission to discuss the business of the city. We ask thee to bless us with thy spirit to help lead our discussion with reason and respect. We say this prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Turning to our first item on the agenda, we have a discussion of subdivision ordinance updates. This is Chapter 18, Improvement Completion Agreements, and I will turn the time over to Lisa.
Great, thank you. We have our next exciting chapter in the subdivision ordinance. We're up to Chapter 18. This used to be Chapter 15, though, because I've renumbered some. But so this chapter is about improvement completion agreements, which we currently call improvement agreements. But we've redefined that as an improvement completion agreement to try and follow now the statute redefines these, so we're just trying to be consistent with the usage. Theirs is actually even longer. It's improvement completion assurance and warranty. But anyway, so whenever a subdivider comes in to subdivide, they are required to put in all of the public improvements for that subdivision, the streets, the sidewalks, all of that. So basically, the development pays for the infrastructure in the city. And then once it's complete and after warranty, we accept it, and then the city thereafter takes care of that in perpetuity. So this chapter is attempting to explain these improvement agreements and the warranty period and how much money they have to put up and when they get that money back during the process. So once they complete the sidewalks, we give them most of their money back. In our current ordinance, this is really one section, just a section number in Chapter 4. But we felt like when the DRC was reviewing this with the consultant that we really just wanted to highlight this and give it its own chapter because we do deal with these agreements a lot, and it makes sense to just have one chapter dealing with all of the bond reductions and et cetera. So you'll notice in this, I did make the change to the improvement bond types that we accept, which you just recently recommended to the council, and they approved that. So we accept the cash bond and the escrow agreement type. So I've made that correction. There may be just a caveat that there may be some additional corrections that I'd like to make based upon the 2019 statutory amendments. They're always changing the bonding requirements. But I do think that it's fairly up to date. Just might have a couple other comments in the next round, but I'm happy to take any comments. I guess we just kind of go page by page. If you have anything on page 1, really the reason I like to put the terms of the agreement in the statute or in the ordinance is because it's mandatory. And if anybody wants to argue with what's in our agreement, they have to amend the ordinance. If it's in the ordinance, they don't just get to argue about a contractual clause. They would actually have to go and get an ordinance amendment. So I try to put the very minimum requirements in ordinance.
Lisa, on this section .020, the terms and conditions, the very first sentence, the improvement completion agreement shall be in a form approved by the city council. Okay, I get that. Council will approve some kind of form. And it goes on to say, and may contain additional provisions approved by the city attorney. What does that mean, approved by the city attorney? Is that like something that you can require in your discretion, or what does it mean to be as approved by the city attorney?
That's a good question, and a provision that I've struggled with every time I read this draft, because what we do is we take some of our standard form agreements like this and a franchise agreement to the city council and say, approve this agreement as to form. And if they approve it, we don't have to take it back continually. The city manager can just sign it because we've already approved that form. But sometimes the developer wants little changes to that agreement that this provision is trying to address. And maybe we could say additional provisions, non-substantive provisions acceptable to the city attorney. That's really the way I interpret that. And that's what I always tell developers. I said, you can either adopt this agreement. If you want any changes, we'll have to go to the city council. So I use it as a negotiating point as well, that, hey, you can sign this form or we can go on. But there are some times where, like even in the last couple months, a bank has made a legitimate point about one of our provisions. And usually I go back and try and change the form. But so that's what that clause is trying to address. But if it's more acceptable, I could just say may contain additional non-substantive provisions acceptable to the city attorney. Or take it out, if you like.
No, I was wondering if we needed to put as allowed or required, or allowed and or required, or something along. Approved just seemed weird to me.
Yes, true.
I mean, it felt ambiguous.
Well, and I don't like the discretion of that, but the way I interpret it personally is
as non-substantive.
It's not going to be much, but I do like the authority to make a couple changes on a.
So what if you said a non-substantive may contain additional non-substantive provisions as approved by the city attorney, or as allowed by?
Okay.
I don't know. I'll leave it to your discretion on that. Just, it feels, approved seems awkward.
Yes, that sounds good. Okay.
I have two quick items. I think we're missing a number 4.
Oh, yeah. Say that.
Oh, yeah. Great.
And then on number 5, the 120%, is that standard? I know I do a lot of work, and a lot of other places it's 110% of the cost estimate. I don't know if that's...
Yes, and that's something that I've discussed as a questionable provision, but that's currently our practice. But yes, I think by statute they're trying to reduce. There's a debate over, the reason we do that is we have a 20% contingency.
Centerville has a 20% contingency.
Built into all of its bonds. So you could say that it's going to be 100% of the city engineer's estimate, and the engineer's estimate includes a 20% contingency, but I like to be more transparent and say it's going to be 120% because of that contingency. So I guess we could say, well, yeah, that's a good question, and I'll chat with the city engineer again and see if there's. Okay. But I've had that discussion, and we're still at 120.
Continued question on that. Maybe this is something that Thomas you could fill in. So, in my experience, I thought it was you would pay the bond amount, and then they would release 90%, and the 10% contingency was part of the 100%.
Yeah, the 10% is set by statute for the warranty period. Cities cannot retain more than 10% for the warranty period, and we do comply with that.
Oh, I see. I misunderstood.
Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
So, yeah, we'll have the bond, and then we always retain 10% for the warranty.
I see.
And that's statutory maximum for the warranty
Contingency, not
period.
warranty. Duh.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, yeah.
Okay, anything on page 2? I did notice after putting it in your packet, there's a couple references to section or subsection, and those need to be CMC to follow our standard citation format.
The reference to the Utah code at the very bottom of that page is italicized,
yeah.
and it's not anywhere else.
Okay. Okay, page 3. Oh, there's only 3 pages. That makes it easy.
Well, that one was easy. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right. Moving to the next item on our agenda, we are going to continue our discussion of general plan and zoning overlay with the South Main Street corridor, and I will turn the time over to staff.
Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. As you recall from our last meeting, we were finalizing just a draft policy for the general plan for the South Main Street corridor. I've renamed your attachment to the Planning Commission version 1.0, just for the sake of keeping a library of where we're at. And I did clean up the versions you've seen in the past, but tried to highlight the changes that we talked about at the meeting. I did notice there's a couple of places I didn't mark in yellow with the language, but it contained what you wanted. The fragmented term, the corridor is fragmented and linear. There's a couple of spots I didn't highlight, but I did add it into the document. And so I don't know what you want to proceed with that and look at that, or the idea also is this is just your draft version in preparation for later discussions with the public. So you can decide how much time you want to spend on that version. The next step would be to look at the zoning ordinance overlay. I've prepared that overlay. There is one section you see in the overlay about uses. I put it in to be written. Question came to us before the meeting is what's the expectation? And I think it's flexible for how this commission wants to approach it. But I think the use list is an important component, and rather than staff just create it, we would take that as kind of a separate item, even though it's a subsection item. We'd bring back the history of what you recommended, what had happened, and we could flush out that section at a later date. And I think that because that's so important, it's kind of a discussion of itself. The other thing I mentioned to Chair Heyman before the meeting, in reflecting of our past meeting and the concern and passion that I voiced and watched myself twice in editing the document for tonight, I think the use list is a component, and I think that's something that I would hope that in the future that as we have a discussion, that use list doesn't become the first focal point, because that will have its merits and probably likely a lot of discussion potentially. And so I anticipate that maybe there's a way we can, through our presentation to the public as well as to the city council, we can discuss how we approach talking about the policy discussion before we roll up our sleeves into the use list, which may introduce some controversy. And I'm not exactly sure yet how to approach that, but I think that's truly what my anxiety was at the last meeting, is not to have everybody run out to the first issue that they have, and that takes over the whole discussion of the plan. So, but tonight, it's really what you want to do. We can go over the general plan edits. I anticipate you have some opportunity before we go out to the public to check the document also, so I want you to be comfortable before we publish it out for the public hearing. But tonight, I anticipated potentially it looks like a lot of sections, but a lot of it's introductory, the scope and the purpose, maybe getting into the first section of building design. You'll notice in there, if you compare it to the general plan, there's a little bit of inconsistency, particularly when we talk about building heights and what's on the west side versus the east side. There's still, in my mind, unsurety exactly how to broach that. But I think the concepts of trying to translate that information into the ordinance is the challenge of what we're thinking, and then how do we regulate that when a site plan comes in. And that's a difficult transition to some extent. So I'm going to leave it to you how you want to begin your review.
Okay. Cori, I will tell you that I was originally thinking that we were going to send both the general plan and the overlay up to the city council, right? I saw it as a part.
So did I originally see
part
it as a
and
package.
parcel. Although they're both, I mean, having gone through the general plan, this is really meaty. I mean, it's very extensive. It took us a long time to get through it. And so I worry if we're sending both things up at the same time that you might get short shrift on either end.
True.
And it also occurs to me as we're talking in particular, well, that's going to be driven by a lot of what the vision is for the Main Street. If we send it up to the city council and they come back to us and say, whoa, planning commission, we don't want this to be primarily commercial. We really want to develop this into a different residential area. That, I think, is going to impact how we want to look at uses and other issues on the overlay. So
And because we worked on the use list and then we're told by the city council, actually, wait, let's go back.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back. So I think it makes sense to do what we were asked to do, which is send up what we were asked to rethink first, and then we can address those use lists and present that as a separate feature.
So I am going to propose, and I would love your feedback on this, but I am going to propose, let's go ahead and get comfortable with the South Main Street corridor language. And I think Cori has done a great job of trying to incorporate all of our schizophrenic comments and, package them all up. And we had asked him to incorporate it so that we could review it all one time together with all of the revisions in it. And then let's go ahead and get this one out to the public so that we can get some feedback and then meet with the city council and see what they think. And that's not to say that we can't go ahead and continue trying to start tackling the overlay, but I think that we should, I think that we should disjoin these two things, and let's go ahead and push through the general plan. Does anybody have any concerns with that approach?
I think it's a good plan.
Good, all right, I like it. So let's start first with the South Main Street Corridor General Plan, the new revised document that Cori has put together, the 1.0 version. Normally I go through these page by page, but I think that the revisions are pretty minimal. So I am going to just open this one up and say, is there anything in here that anyone feels like has not adequately captured what we have talked about, or is there any additional areas of concern that anyone would like to address, or are we comfortable with saying, this looks pretty good to us, let's put it into a final draft format and get it out for public comment? Anyone?
I think it generally looks pretty good as I read through it. I mean, obviously, we've gone through it a number of times, and this represents a lot of different comments. In fact, schizophrenic was the right word. There was a couple times it was like, that we'd go down one or other, but we recognize this, and then it's like this, but we recognize that. But yeah, I think, there were a few typos. Cori is mortal after all, but I'm sure that can be addressed as things progress.
I noticed that there were several twos in the wrong spot.
Two, to be precise.
T-O.
Yeah.
Oh.
Two twos.
No, I like this. I read through it, and obviously I was looking at the changes, but also just kind of reading through the rest of the stuff. And I like where it is. I like where we're at with this. I feel like it has captured what we've talked about, and this is something that I could, support kind of presenting to the public and getting their feedback. So I'm ready to go.
I also think that it accurately describes, I think, the history of what happened with the South Main Street corridor area. And also, I did take note, just so you know, that you added in potentially.
I did, very purposely.
And I'm glad you highlighted that, because I was even thinking, I was like, maybe I should just go back and see. Maybe I should just go back and look at that. But you resolved that by helping us recognize that, yes, there are some differing views, but we can temper that by how we present it. So I appreciate that you took that into consideration.
It's like Cori knows you.
He does. He's like, I know what she's going to say if it's not in there.
Well, this is your version. That's why I named it PC version 1.0.
He's taking his name off of PCs.
PC, it's all you. But I do think, I think it is a good mix of realistic, but also one thing that I always look to you to, Cori, and I appreciate from you is that regardless of political climate or of what the Planning Commission may or may not see or recognize, I love that your first and most important purpose is to be a planner, and it's to help us see good planning. And sometimes that means a little bit of butting heads, but I appreciate that about you because I think that is a role that no one else in the city can play. And so thank you for that, and thank you for listening to what we have to say, but also for patiently trying to help us understand and helping the city council understand as well.
Well, thank you. I hope I am helpful more than a hindrance.
Yep, I think you are.
Any particular changes to the general plan as drafted? If not, I am going to direct Cori to go ahead and clean up any remaining typos. I didn't catch any, but I
wasn't
Well, there's a
looking
few. I
at
caught them
that.
when I reread it.
I looked very quickly on this one. I'm going to admit, I focused mostly on the highlights.
I have to give it into Donna's hands
There's
because
still the function ability. There's that one function ability on the first page.
Yeah, I probably did
That's
not
the
give
only
this one
thing.
as close of a read as I should have.
yeah. Well,
but-
I'll have somebody else look through it on the proof too.
But let's go ahead and, so next step will be to get this one out for public comment. What do you think that means in terms of timing, Cori?
Well, yeah, the question that we kind of addressed a little bit a couple of meetings ago is, do we want to have a session with the city council first
Yeah.
before we going out to the public?
That's what I would prefer, actually, Shaylin. I don't know
Okay.
how other people feel.
And so one step would be is to set up a time for the general plan portion with the city council.
If we do it with the city council first, we obviously won't have any feedback from the public as to whether they like
That's
the
what
plan or
you'll lack
not.
you'll lack that check.
And I think I could see benefits and drawbacks in doing it either way, so I'm willing to explore doing it either way. If we met with the city council first, it would allow us, I suppose, the possibility of going back and making revisions to the general plan before we send it out to the public.
Well, and this is not us sending it up to them and them rejecting it. This is us talking through it with them.
Sure.
And if there's something they're concerned about that will cause the plan to really get in trouble with them or not really be successful, they can express that to us. While as if we just go straight to the public and then up to them, and they have something that they've been trying to communicate to us that we're not there with, then I feel like it's setting us up for some confusion.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence because I do think that public input could be very helpful in helping to educate the city council as to what it is that the public is thinking on this issue and what things they like and what things they don't like.
I kind of think we are our own body, right? Sure, we work under the direction a lot of times of the city council, but we are our own body. So I kind of like the idea of going to the public, finishing our own process really, and then we can bookend this process with the city council. We started it with the city council with some really broad ideas and some general ideas, whatever. We did our process. Let's finish our process, bookend it with the city council, go back to them and.
I would generally probably agree with that. I like the ability that we have to be an independent body, but there are two reasons why I hesitate doing that. One is that this particular document has been a source of heartache for many people in the city for a long time, and it specifically was a source of debate and controversy on the last election. It is right now a current election and within weeks of an election. So us putting this out right now to the public without first talking to the city council could cause, I believe, undue drama that could either fuel a fire or cause misunderstanding to occur in an election cycle. So I'm concerned about that. And secondly, because of what happened with the public space plan, with the use list, and with the things that that are both focused around these, that we were directed to do, and we then took we're independent, so then we'll do it, and then we'll give it back up to them stance, and have been unsuccessful 2 times in that regard. I would weigh on the side of trying to keep the communication lines open. We don't necessarily have to agree with what they say at the work session, and I still think we can be a very independent body, and we can say, you know what, we've heard you, we still don't think X is this, so we're going to come back and discuss, and we're going to still present this to you, and we hope you reconsider, or whatever it is. I still think we can be an independent body, but we've sort of lacked that communication with the city council twice over, and I'd rather see this be something that is pretty successful, and I think that a work session would help that.
Let me speak to your first point, because I think in terms of timing, I doubt that we're going to be able to get this thing out before the election. And even if we could try to get it out before the election, I think that there wouldn't be a problem with us, delaying it by 30 days before we put it out.
Yeah, I think your approach to the public is going to be something that you want to strategize with. My minimum would be is that we're going to send some type of notice out to all the property owners on Main Street.
Yeah.
The issue is how do we broaden that to the public at large and put up notification? Is it some signing issues? How do we approach that? There's more than just the property owners that are involved, but definitely the property owners are going to want to know what's happening in planning with their property. So, you're looking at a meeting of the 23rd for the Planning Commission and your first meeting in November, and you only have one in November, and then you have one in December. So I think holiday time frame, public participation, strategy, limited number of meetings by the end of the year is going to really put some constraints.
So I think that we can address the first comment, because I don't think that it's going to get out that quickly, but you raise a good point on your second point. I'd like to hear from Logan and Thomas. I'm putting you guys on the spot. What do you think? Because like I said, I can see positives and negatives.
Yeah, it's hard. Being on the planning commission, I would prefer it to go to the public to get their opinion. But if I was on the city council, I would rather see it first before it goes public. Just if something changes and it is because of the city council, it could look like, why did you change this? I like this. Whereas if they can massage it or whatever before it gets to the public, then, I see that standpoint as well. So as far as working jointly with the city council, I think that's probably the better route to go, is to allow them to see it and to review it and to give their opinion before it goes public.
Okay. Logan?
I'd prefer to go public first and then city council after. I think there is a real risk that the public could go crazy about it. The city council might think, was that predictable, Kevin?
No, it just means that Shaylin gets to
I'm
break the
only
tie.
laughing because it's 2-2
Oh,
right now.
Yeah, I think the city council can take that in. I think it'll be valuable feedback for them, and I value their time. I guess I should value the public's time as well, But weighing both sides, I think I'd rather see it go to the public first. Don't include the redded section there, Cori. If we include the optional component section in the public review, then we will effectively not get feedback on anything else, I don't think.
I agree.
I think that would be a huge, huge target, because we haven't even heard. It's like we put that in because we were asked by the city council to do that, but if we present that to the public as in that's what we want, I don't know if I support that. So that's why it's in there right now, in my mind, because we were directed to look at that. And so we were going to bring it back to the city council and say, okay, you wanted us to look at this. This is part of the plan that you can excise. And now we're gonna, so I don't know if I feel comfortable with it going straight out to the public like that.
But
I-
at some point, the public's got to
Yeah.
see that and talk about that, and at some point, we do want the feedback on that. So are we going to go to the public twice with this, once without and once with?
No, what I meant was, don't include the corridor-wide standalone, meaning the salt and pepper residential that we talked about, that's accessory, that's part of existing buildings.
That's the only thing that's left in
That's
there.
it. We took out 5B.
Yeah.
5B is
Right.
gone.
We took out the other
Okay.
one.
Yeah, you're right. No, then I take it back, because I think that is, that, I was under the impression that this Reddit area, sorry, my bad, was that larger item. And so, first of all, I was proud of you, Cori, that you included that, and, you know, I guess I didn't read through as thoroughly as I should, but.
So do you think really that if we go to the city council first, it is going to change drastically based on our discussions with them? What are your thoughts?
I don't think so.
So what is the danger in going to the city council first? What is the danger in that?
In my mind, it's not a danger. It's just a duplication of effort, and it's protecting the integrity of the process, I suppose. In terms of, look, we could go to the city council, and maybe I'll convince myself that this is the right way to go. I'm still really on the fence. If we go to the city council and we get their feedback and we go out to the public and the public's feedback is very different than the feedback that we've gotten from the city council, then I think that we have to meet again with the city council and say, hey,
Yeah.
we got some really different feedback from you. I suppose if we go to the city council and then we go out to the public and the public comment is consistent with what we've heard from the city council, then we don't need to go back to the city council. So
Do you feel like, so let's say the city council comment is different than what we maybe, let's say hypothetically, we go to the public first, and then we go to the city council, and we, like we have in the past, present something that we feel is consistent with what we've sent out to the public, and we send it up to the city council, and yet it is not what they want. How do you feel about the process then?
well, either way, the result is going to be the same, right? I mean, it's because if we go to the city council first and they like it, and then we go, or they dislike it, I suppose. Well, I don't know. What do you think
Do
about
you
that?
feel like that we can still maintain independence while also trying to work on our relationship with the city council?
I do. We've obviously done the laboring war on this, and I suppose the city council could come back and say, you are completely and totally off base. You know, maybe I am convincing myself that we need to go to the city council first, because if they do say that, then we wasted our time going to the public. If we come to them and they say, I don't care what the public says, you are way off base.
So here's a thought on that, though, is if we go to the city council first, no, okay, let's back up for a second. If we go to the public first, the soonest we get this to the public is the November 13th meeting. That's a month from now.
After
Because
the
we
election.
got to do all the noticing. That'll be after the election, but November 13th would be the first
But
time we could get this to the
It will still
public.
be something, okay, keep going.
But then, if we do it the other way, we go to the city council first, even if that happens, you know,
Probably after the election, most likely.
yeah, especially if it happens after the election, then the absolute earliest I see us getting this out to the public is the first meeting in December, and I really worry about public input, so we're gonna just push it to January, I think. Maybe not, but the meeting in December, I don't see that one being a really popular public meeting.
Do you think we can't get a work session together with them before that? Within a month?
Well, you can get a work session, but I agree that the public comment's a little,
Well, then,
outreach for it's probably better after the first of the year.
but the noticing takes 21 days? What do you have to have?
Yeah, well, the noticing will take 3 weeks before, yes, to get to the paper.
So
But
I
the
guess we-
issue is how soon do we send the mailers out to the property owners? How do we engage with the public abroad? Do we put it in a newsletter? Do we put it in a utility billing?
I
But-
just,
so
I
you're
really
thinking-
would like this to be successful, and I feel like the way, even if we disagree with the city council, having a relationship with them that is a little bit different than what we've done in the past might be a strategy that will help us find success.
One of the things I add in, and it's probably going to get me in a little bit of trouble because it's my perception of what happens. When you achieve controversial things, and there's interest groups, for lack of better terms, watching and monitoring those controversial things, the tendency to show up to the planning commission is less incentivized to the person on to an entity on a legislative decision. They'll usually kick that can to the city council, and then they come out and prepare their arguments appropriately. So in some ways, from my perspective, I like the idea that we go to the city council and we get a general basis of, are we somewhat, I mean, you're not trying to say, do you agree with this?
Right.
You're really just trying to say, this is what we've come up with, and here's why.
Yeah.
And if they don't see anything that they have a great concern out, then you go out to the public and they come back and say, we don't like this for X, Y, and Z. That's better, because now there's a record of saying, yeah, this is what we got from the public. So I don't know how you reach that point, but I would rather have the public come to the planning commission and voice their concerns, because if it's something opposing this, if they're afraid it's not in this, I want them to come to this meeting and tell us it's not in here.
Okay, so here is gonna be my proposal. We obviously have an election coming up, and I do want to be sensitive to that, and I also want to be realistic to that, because if we have a big changeover in our city council come January 1, then any input that we get from the existing city council could be very different than the input that we get from a city council January 1. And given that we are so close to that, and given that we know that the public input process is probably going to be diminished over the holiday season, I am inclined to go ahead and put this thing out for a meeting with the city council in January so that we can talk to them. I know that that pushes the can down the road by 2 months, but it will get us in a meeting with the city council, whoever the city council is, so that we can be on the same page, and then we can push out public comment, you know, the latter part of January, beginning part of February, and I think get better feedback that way.
I don't mind that, because I have one item we've got to get done before the deadline of December 1st on our moderate income housing, so if we can just separate that out from the whole discussion.
Let's do that.
And even though it delays it as far as talking with the council and getting out to the public, doesn't mean that you can't use the next meetings to go through drafts of the zoning ordinance, so that the time frame and the separation is shorter. Right.
And I mean, we have dealt a lot with our existing city council, and I think that they have done a good job of working with us, but we may get radically different input come January 1. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. So I think that it makes sense how we've done it, and given the timing considerations, let's just go ahead and plan on teeing this one up for a work session meeting with the new city council in January, and then we can move forward with it. And in the meantime, we can focus on the affordable housing component. Anyone have any major concerns with that approach?
I can support that.
I can support that too.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Okay. All right, so with that being
Silence
done,
is agreement.
we've now got the South Main Street Corridor Overlay District. So this is the draft that Cori has prepared. Sorry, Cori, you threw me on the highlighted allowable overlay uses. I was reading this going, well, he said architecture in the beginning, but now does he want us to focus on that piece?
I just wanted to show
or-
you that that's red line because it's not ready.
Because it's not
Yeah.
ready yet. So you were planning on focusing on architecture. So I am going to.
If we could get to that point,
How do you guys, given that we're going to be pushing the discussion on the Main Street corridor, do you guys want to move forward and start digging into South Main Street overlay? You want to put this one aside for a little bit so we can focus on the other piece that Cori is doing?
The only concern there is that the feedback from the city council could
impact it.
impact our vision for this. But I'm inclined to say let's keep going on this, maybe with the caveat that we might have to revisit this.
I still like what you were saying at the beginning of the meeting where it might be really good to get sort of that view before we head down this use. I personally think, but I'm fine with whatever anyone else wants to do.
Well, I agree with you. If there was something in the general plan, we would have to go back and revisit this. My guess is it probably isn't a major issue. It would probably center around residential and how strong that should play a role. I think the overlay uses are different, so I think if you're amenable, we could start going through this for this meeting, October meeting, November 1 meeting, December only 1 meeting, get through most of that, knowing it matches up somewhat to extent with your general plan vision. We could go to that work session on the general plan. If something significant comes back in, we'll reach back that. But I think the use list is something that you'll delve in completely separate, and probably after the first of the year and after the general plans move forward to see how the uses play out. And so I think the uses are
Totally separate than versus
completely
this whole
separate,
thing. Yeah.
document and discussion altogether, just because I think how much commercial, what is that commercial? What kind of
Well-
things could be acceptable to synergize the commercial, yet keep it local? I think that's a hefty
and-
discussion in itself.
We did talk at length about the fact that, we still would like a look and feel of this area regardless of use. So this could still be applicable that coordinates with the general plan based on what we're hoping to see the feel of the area. And then based on feel, then we're a little bit more comfortable with some of those uses.
So I would propose, because there are going to be some elements in here that are going to be impacted depending on whether the city
True.
council agrees with our vision or not.
True.
So I would propose, if we're going to tackle this now, we can go ahead and tackle the pieces that we think are not going to be impacted. So the things like architecture and maybe landscaping, the things that strike me as being more fundamentally integrated with what our general plan is, are the overlay uses, the off-street parking, because that's going to depend on what the uses are along that main street, the residential use alternatives. But I will.
However you'd like, I'm open.
Yeah. Well, we're all prepared to talk architecture today, so let's go ahead and talk architecture.
Okay.
And we can give you some feedback, and then because we've radically deviated from where we were going to be. So why don't we dig into architecture now, since we're prepared to talk about it, give Cori feedback, and then everyone go home and think about how you want to tackle this overlay, and we can come and talk about that the next
Sure.
meeting. So, okay, so anything that you want us to focus on, particularly on the architecture section, Cori, before we just jump in?
Just a couple of highlights in looking at what I've seen is, the Parrish Lane Gateway design standards, when you define area and so forth, I think that's something to think about as outside of the architecture, is how the wording of where the boundaries are at. I'm using language somewhat similar to the Parrish Lane Design Guidelines, and that's the issue of quick quack. Was it in or was it out? And so I think that's something that you probably ought to at least focus on, is that defined clearly enough? One of my main concerns in there is not to accidentally rope with a half block some residential lot that's sitting a half block back and gets tucked into the corridor. So, but I think you should have a discussion about that. The architecture, there's some places, and Lisa's not here, but you're going to see some exceptions playing a role in here. And that makes some elements uncomfortable to people, is how, everybody else has to do this, but you have an exception for that. Mm-hmm. And the exceptions you'll notice are around really the civic district. It's really recognizing that the civic district is a different design animal if it's a public building, because With a civic architecture, we're expecting a little more multiple story. Look at City Hall. And the sacrifice of what we're expecting is that this is a green space area. It's a court, it's a town square, it's whatever you want it to be from a civic building, but civic buildings are very different than commercial buildings. And I think we build the case for the exception, but I think that's a controversial issue, is so the government buildings get out of something that the private sector gets to do. How's that set an example? And I would argue that, yeah, the civic uses get out of some things in the sense of restrictions, but the expectation on the opposite end is that there's much more landscaping and much more public space that's devoted, and in park area that's devoted to the community. Do you want to have that same burden? So I think that's just, that message is a little bit probably uncomfortable for some folks when they read it. The other issue is just, what are you expecting in the architecture? How much, I'm recreating some of the form-based code with the 60% of the first floor level facade. I'm leaking that over from the form-based code into the design standards. That's a little bit more than the Parrish Lane does. And because I'm still leaking the form-based, Parrish Lane's 25%, 15% on a secondary facade. And so some of that leaks over. I think you want to look at that. And then the other last element that I would say in the architecture is this concept that we're trying to not allow lots to be aggregated together so you can do a great big huge development. You'll notice at the end of this zoning ordinance is a table, the bulk area requirements, where we have now maximum lot width. And so our commercial area is 50 foot of lot width. Our blocks are running around 280 to 300 feet. And so now I'm starting to, in the architecture, saying, okay, if we have a building, here's your mass and here's your architecture. But if you're a long building along the street, even though we're minimizing the lots, we might have a long building along the street. Now I'm saying there's some changes vertically and horizontally that are expectation that you still have. And think of the form-based code. If you're running a lot every 50 feet, there's some type of different change going on down the street. That's what a form-based code does. Well, I'm leaking that over, but not as stringent. I'm saying, okay, now you can have a wider lot, not too wide, but you can have a wider lot. But if you have a longer building associated with that lot, we want it stepped in a fashion, and that's still taking some of that form-based code and reinterpreting it in a much loose, I don't want to say loose because that's less stringent manner than the form-based code. So keep that in mind, is that there's still some leakage of the form-based code coming back into this language.
Cori, you mentioned the Parrish Lane design guidelines, and I'm looking back at the section that you drafted here on how this overlay is going to apply. And remind me what the language of the Parrish Lane guidelines were. It had some, like a strong visual impact or some.
A significant presence.
It was sort of ambiguous.
Visual presence to Parrish Lane.
And what was your reason for not including similar language here? Because you have very carefully defined it to a commercial use property.
Commercially zoned.
Yeah, it's a couple of things. Back to, let's take the that's probably not fair anymore, but you had the fire department, and that's a civic building, and it's hiding the residential unit behind. But I'm a little bit worried about if we have a defined area that's a half a block, but not all of the CM zone actually equals a half a block. So trying to think where you would be. The U shape behind the Taco Time and the Maverick, does that have a significant visual presence, but yet it's still zone CM? But if something along Cedar Springs or the lot behind the Huffaker Dental built a building that's commercial because they have a commercial lot behind their building. Does that have a significant presence? And I'm trying to avoid that we have something that's sitting in the background and drawing them into it, because CM zone is very limited, but it's not at all at a half a block.
Right.
I'm trying to say just the commercial zone properties rather than just have a significant presence, because that significant presence was debated at Quick Quack. I see where the Planning Commission landed where you were at, but the language was so squishy that the attorney made a pretty good argument of why it wasn't part of Parrish land.
I love squishy language.
Yeah, but I actually liked that we had that discretion, because it really, I think that there was a reason to say, does this have, a significantly visual impact? And in some properties, it might have yes, and in some, it might not have, and it might have depended on what it was that they were putting up or not. And so, me personally, I like having that flexibility.
I'm just worried about a house that you can be seen from the main street getting roped into it because you can see it.
Yeah.
Well, if I can see it from Main Street and it's a commercial property, I want it to be roped in.
Right, if it's a commercially zoned property, but if it's a
Right.
residentially zoned property,
Then it's out.
Well, can you say that both?
Yeah.
Can you use
Could
both?
and I think that's
of
where I
those?
was trying in that. I don't know how well the language, see the boundaries? So the boundary consists of any commercial use property that has frontage on South Main Street, is part of a larger common development project that has or will have frontage. So an example would be is that if we ever build a police station on the back area here, that would still have a presence in my mind, even though it's not visually seen, but it's a part of the larger project. Or it's commercially zoned within a half block either side between, so that's what I'm really trying to say, rather than just say significant presence.
Could you include that into there?
Yeah, we could put in or has a significant presence.
Or has?
I would say or has a significant visual presence. And maybe just to help clarify that, would you say as determined by this planning commission or the?
Land use authority or city in
The
general.
planning authority? Yeah.
Yeah, I could add that in. I was just trying to avoid the debate.
See, and I think that the debate was good, because I still think that we have a really good looking Quick Quack on
I
Parrish
love
Lane.
our.
Oh, I don't have a problem with the Quick Quack. To me, it's just these properties that sit funky behind.
Yeah.
But I think by limiting it to commercial stuff, I'm fine with that. And then just, if it's residential, whatever.
Okay, I can add that in.
That would be my preference as well.
Cori, in regards to as determined by the land use authority or the city or whatever, that was one question I had that comes up in number one here, double I and triple I.
Yeah, this is the determination with historic context.
Yeah, and it says as acceptable by the city. I assume that's probably a defined term somewhere, and that would mean the land use authority. That was just a little ambiguous.
Yeah, I
How would
mean,
you interpret that?
the city, I mean, we can talk with Lisa or talk with our chair. I mean, the city's the broad category, and it's basically saying, hey, it's determined by the city. Then you go to the city ordinances and you find out who in the city makes that decision. Oh, it's the planning commission.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, although I would defer to Lisa.
Yeah.
And deemed acceptable.
But you could say, to be more specific but generalized, by the approving land use authority.
Is that what we'd prefer there? So if they're trying to say,
That's not the tone that the rest of the ordinance is structured at. Land use authority is a foreign term to our zoning ordinance.
well, where would we want it to end? Would we want Cori to be able to determine that, or is that something that we would want as a body?
Well, I couldn't determine it, because if it's a commercial piece of property, the land use authority is the planning commission.
Okay, so as read right now, acceptable by the city, you couldn't determine that on your own. That would come to the planning commission.
No, you have to go to the city ordinance on where site plans are approved,
And that, okay,
and that is specifically assigned to the planning commission.
got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate here, Cori. So looking now at small I, right? So now my building has to have at least one or more of the following. So looking at the first one, use of the same architectural elements and materials for structures as listed on the city's landmark register. City's landmark register says that houses use concrete for their foundations. I say
Well,
I have concrete as a foundation.
You know, it doesn't say that on the landmark register. We have buildings on the landmark register. So what this is saying is, whatever materials used on the landmark register is a qualifying element.
All of them, some of them?
All of them.
One of them?
All of them. Any one of, as long as those materials are used on something that is on the landmarks register,
Right.
then we're counting it as satisfying that element.
But all of the materials that are put on the buildings have to be found somewhere in the landmarks register. All of them.
No, I'm trying to, I think is if they go out to a landmark registered building, this is on the national, and they're saying, I'm using that design, we're saying it's okay.
I'm just asking, how much leeway are we gonna give them between using use of historic versus contemporary, right? And whether we wanna allow, like what level, if I use 80% of, if my building matches 80% of a historic registry, but it has 20% of new updated elements, is that okay? 70-30, 90-10? I guess I'm just trying to understand how much.
And I think,
I have to
I
put on
remember
there.
you were concerned about which type too. Some of the ones are more advantageous than others.
Like, we don't want 60s style.
Yeah.
But if memory serves, this wasn't, we didn't want this to be heavy teeth. I mean, if you read 1, 2, and 3, both of those are very achievable. I mean, we're not trying to get in and make them remake anything really. We're just trying to get like a nod towards the
Right.
historic nature. And so, you know, as acceptable by the city, clause at the end of all three of those kind of like we could say, yeah, you're right. You put that shingle. I mean, I think we're looking for a nod. I'd hate to up the ante on this because it would defeat the original purpose, which was, you know, we want it to be contextual, to have that relatability, but this isn't the
Yeah, but
I think, but oh, go ahead. I mean,
no, I was just gonna say to Shaylin's point there, you say if you have to use at least one, and let's decide we're gonna use little I,
significant use rather than just use, oh, I put a little decorative
That's my.
Okay.
this is
coin
my-
on
this
the
is
on the
my
wall. It's the
question.
same.
no, but
So-
that's a good clarifier right
Yeah.
there. That's a good qualifier because otherwise, to Shaylin's point, you say, well, historic buildings have brick. I'm gonna use brick too, but I'm gonna use that, what was that style that was really popular many years ago where you put the brick down and don't wipe off the stuff
Yeah,
that
that
comes,
goopy stuff.
the goopy stuff?
We'll read II. I mean, II is that's like
Yeah.
a line on the ground hopscotch level. I mean, that's super broad. Architectural elements, materials that match or are similar to the time periods on either the city register or similar Utah structures on the national register. That is a huge net.
So my question for us, because I think that that is true, I think that the language is drafted is, it could be either read as really broad or really narrow or some like amalgamation in between. And what do we want it to be,
significant, substantial,
right? Noticeable, recognizable amount, more than not.
What's the difference between significant and substantial?
Significant
it's
might
back to the
play,
squishy
like-
language part.
Significant might play a more prominent visual impact, but it may not be as far as like mathematical equation. It may not
Substantial would be more than
substantial.
significant.
Substantial might be more than significant.
Substantial,
But significant would be like, we featured this thing here, even though it's not everywhere.
Yeah,
What
so look at the county's library. If you look at the pillars and the decorative use of the design on those pillars, that comes, that roof design and on the pillars, that comes from the old schools in Centerville City. But the building itself is not significant in its design, but the features on it match something in historic.
What about prominent?
Prominent?
Could be, right, the thing.
No,
that you're
which
gonna
means
use-
it's noticeable. You can see it's
noticeable.
it's
not just
well
the use of
defined.
brick or whatever. You know, as we're talking about all of this, Cori, it occurs to me that it would be very helpful if maybe I'm gonna ask to table this one, because I wanna see the landmarks register. I wanna see.
All the structures on it?
Yeah, I wanna see like what this is that we're gonna be
Sure.
recommending, and I will admit, I did not go and pull that up before
Either.
today.
Well, I've actually felt like, I thought it was nice that we met with the landmarks committee before, but I would really like to kind of have a little bit meatier conversation with them And I know that they're currently looking at, correct me if I'm wrong, Cori, but they're currently looking at using their own funds to put up signs in significant areas along Main Street and other areas of the city. to
Yeah, there's some
direct
kiosks
people,
that they have planned that they want to spend funds
which
on.
it would be great if we could just put pause on that and let that be part of our discussion. And, I mean, we've already,
That's a great
we've
idea.
already said that we want to have those elements along Main Street. So let's let them save their pennies and put this together in this greater, bigger process. I don't know. So I would like the conversation to continue with them a little bit more. I felt like we sort of started it and it was like just very minimal.
No disrespect to them, but there's a struggle in attendance and membership on that committee, and so they're only meeting maybe quarterly at this point in time. So with all honesty, you're probably not going to get anything more significant out of your discussions with them.
What if we gave them some questions or some things to look at or some things to consider?
I think that would be more helpful
before, and then maybe they came back and told us their thoughts.
I think that would be more helpful if they could had something that they wanted to work through as a group and see if they could come up with some answers.
I will tell you from my perspective, it would be incredibly helpful to see some of these visual elements. We've talked about them.
Yeah, but
But
we can give you,
I
yeah,
would
we
love
can
to
provide
see
you a copy of all the structures.
storyboard. I would love to see,
Yeah.
and somebody pointing out to me, this is what this element is. This is an example, or here's a couple examples of what this element
Yeah.
is. That would be very helpful.
We certainly can provide you visuals of what's on the registry.
No,
And
that's
why
true.
don't
I
we-
was just
I'm a
thinking
visual
about,
person.
no, I know, I agree. I was thinking about something basic, like this is what a bollard is.
Yes, I had to look one of those, I had to Google it while we were at a meeting. I'm like a bollard.
Well, and I think even having that and presenting it to maybe them and saying, listen, here are some options of things. What is your input on what you think matches the Centerville landmarks? You know, the city-specific landmarks that you appreciate, and know how do these things that you're seeing here, how do they relate, and how would you encourage these along Main Street type of thing?
Well, why don't we do this? Does anybody else have any like burning comments that they want to give to Cori about the overlay zone?
I know Logan does.
You can Google,
Gretchen.
you can Google all these homes that are on the register.
Do you just put in a list, like
Some of-
Centerville?
Some of them are really good and some of them are kind of ugly.
Yeah, could people say, there was that one that was
Sorry.
just all stucco? Could you
Ugly.
come back and,
Ugly is maybe the wrong word. but
Careful, that's somebody's baby.
Like this one, that's on the registry. So,
yeah, so could someone go to that, say this is 99% stucco, so I'm gonna build my building?
No, because you've got all the other controls below.
No, because you've got on number six, building something constructed
Sure.
with rock, brick, or decorative concrete block, 60% on the first level facade.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it
th-
seems like those are
It's
all
really
just
looking
general.
and we could probably make the language, I mean, I like the squishiness. I'll argue the squishiness on this language because it opens up for an architect and somebody to come in and say, I'm going to look at all these homes. You know, they use some coins. There's some decorative gables. I really like the fascia use on that
Yeah.
building and the brick. I'll come back in and do the 60% of the block, and then here's all of my elements that I'm using from that list.
I think this is why I like the word prominent, and maybe I'll come up
Yes.
with a better term,
Yeah.
but the idea is that I don't want to be heavy-handed in the way that we're doing things, but when people drive down Main Street, I want it to have a recognizable presence. And so whatever prominent is, I just don't want it to be taking the most base elements that
Right.
aren't recognizable and throwing them on and saying, ta-da.
I agree.
Yeah.
Hey, Corey, real quick, number 9, larger buildings, talks about them being stepped. Is that to mean, if I understand that right, we're gonna, as they go up, they're gonna step back away from the road? Is that what that means by
So it's like a
stepped?
flat face, is that what you're looking?
Yeah, stepped is a loose term architecturally in the form-based code. And so an example would be is you could step the building back a distance, which creates it. But stepping also is, you'll use a molding or a crown at a certain height. That steps, that changes, it creates a change. We want it changed vertically and we want it changed horizontally with
So it's
it.
just not like a straight.
Straight
Like a
facade of
wall.
all
Yeah.
same marble
Yeah.
tile used on the building.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to propose that we table this discussion for now so that we can get some more input and feedback
More
in terms of,
context.
more contact, particularly the city's landmarks register, the national parks register, the significant sites list. If you guys could compile that in visual
we can.
format for us, I'm sorry, that's a big job for you, but.
No,
I
it's
mean,
actually pretty easy.
Is it? Good.
Yeah.
I think that that would really help us out. And I think that now that we're kind of going a different direction in how we're going to present this to the city council, this gives us all the
some
opportunity to kind
time.
of sit and think and, okay, how do we want to do this? So,
Yeah.
so let's go ahead and table this one. And let's go ahead and, unless anybody, I didn't mean to cut off discussion prematurely. If anybody else has any, again, major burning discussion points, happy to chat now. Otherwise, I am going to say let's move on to item number 3 on our agenda, which is the Community Development Director's Report and City Council Report. And I'll turn the time over to Cori.
To the agenda. So a couple of things. We have a meeting scheduled. We have a Parrish Creek PDO zoning map amendment. This is the project north of Hogan construction on the west side in the West Centerville neighborhood. They have some elements that the city agreed to in the the CDA for that area. But they would also like to make some sidewalk and landscaping changes now that they've built the buildings and have some concerns with the design. So they are proposing some changes. Because it involves the master plan of the project, it has to return all the way back to the PDO. It's changing some of those elements. So this is a legislative decision as part of their concept plan. Same process to get the PDOs, the same process to amend it. So it's a legislative slash, it's a rezone with a conceptual master plan change. So that'll come to you. Zoning code amendment, we didn't give you the details on that. It's changing. It's not 12-436, it's 12-47, and we had to change the notice on it. It is the Shorelands Commerce Park. They want to add vehicle equipment sales to the use list in the Shorelands Commerce Park. You'll be receiving that from the Salmon group that built the building out there. So they want to do that. Another thing that didn't show up on this agenda, we were at a conference when this agenda went out. We were at the planning conference. What I've already done to I've already sent out a notice with intent to amend the general plan for our moderate income housing report. Lisa has gone through and reviewed that against Senate Bill 34. At our conference, the Workforce Services created a tool for calculating your progress on moderate income housing. So we have some cleanups that are due out of Senate Bill 34 by December 31st. There are other things that we need to do as a result of Senate Bill 34. We need to look at our transportation element and coordinate that. But that's not a deadline date of December 1st. And so I've talked to the city manager, and we're carrying those changes to the general plan. We'll be coming back, what I understand, in spring with cleaning up our general plan and how we're going to broach that. So I have yet to meet with the city council on how we're doing that, but the transportation element will need to be modified. We need to modify our residential section. And because of Senate Bill 34, after the cleanup, we have a yearly reporting process now instead of every other year reporting process. So we'll need to re-engage in the moderate income housing element during that time to get a better handle on setting realistic goals for the moderate income housing. So hopefully I can keep that. This is a cleanup so that we're in compliance with Senate Bill 34, and we have to adopt it by December 31st. So we'll be bringing you the cleanup element ideas that have to be done on your October 23rd. Your first meeting in November would be the public hearing, and if we can achieve a recommendation, we send it to the council for that following week for the cleanup. Cross our fingers. Why that's important. Our TIF funding and our road funds are all tied to that moderate income housing now. So that's the new teeth. The new teeth is your transportation funding is tied to comply with moderate income housing. So we have to report by December 31st what we've done, and post that element online, and post our last reporting findings on the website by December 31st.
Do we use much funding from the TIF or whatever?
We do. Our sidewalk enhancement funds, what we did on the west side, were done with UTA and Wasatch funds. The bridge overpass that we've done was done with those alternative transportation funds. Our master plan for the joint cities for the alternative modes of transportation was done with some of those funds. So, yeah, we
We don't want to lose those funds.
don't want to lose those funds. So what I'm trying to say is I'm not trying to reopen moderate income housing and what should we be doing and what are our goals. We need some cleanups so that we're in compliance with Senate Bill 34. But in reality, the transportation element needs to be updated. There's no deadline to it. And that's the time we'll also talk about, okay, what are the realistic goals that Centerville is going to actively pursue and report on? You have to look at it 5 years, and you have to report your progress every year for those 5 years. So,
It looks like we know what's going to be on our planning commission to-do list
Yeah.
come January, right?
yeah.
Okay.
I have a question, Cori, about Parrish Lane. I know we met with UDOT and they talked with us about the plan to do the additional lane that's going.
The left-hand turn.
Mm-hmm. And also the additional westbound lane that's from, I think it's Second West on. Is that right?
Fourth
Sorry,
West.
I meant Fourth West. Yeah, from
The
Fourth.
dual lefts, is that what you're talking about, at Dairy Queen?
Not only that, but also on the other side, didn't they also talk about there was just going to be a dedicated lane starting on Fourth West, adding a third lane and taking land from that bank that is going to create that lane that will allow westbound traffic that needs to go north. Remember that?
Yeah, they were discussing that project. I know Kevin has been working with them on that project.
Do you have any updates on that, or
I
like?
don't
what's
have
the-
updates on
when's
how
the
far
date
they're
on
along,
that?
because back there during the discussion, it was a couple years out.
I remember it was a couple years out, and then I saw, obviously, they just repaved the road and everything, and I was thinking, are they getting interested in that again, or is it just a repave, and then they're just?
This was just a
Okay.
repave project. That's on a separate track,
Okay,
from what I understand.
okay.
But I can find out from Kevin and update you
I would love an update personally. I
Yeah.
don't know if anyone else is interested.
find out where that's being scheduled, what his thoughts are.
I'd still like to know when they're going to fix the over exchange there at Parrish Lane, because that is
It finally made
so
their
bad.
10-year horizon. I
Yeah,
think
it did,
It
right?
is billed at 60 million now and 92 million when it gets constructed.
wow.
Is that for a single point urban interchange?
Yeah, single point urban interchange is the idea concept. They
Can
have
you
to
describe
obtain.
that again?
What's that?
Can you describe that again?
Uh,
Comes together in the middle. There's
6 North in Salt Lake, where all
Oh,
the
okay.
lights are on
Yeah,
the
yeah,
same
yeah.
bar.
Yeah.
So that's still the design. They have a little bit of right-of-way that they need to obtain. The real critical design that's still being, the early thoughts is because of the dual left at Marketplace and the dual left at 400 West, to eliminate that congestion, the off-ramp would contain a
Single.
lane going underneath the
Yeah.
interchange on the west side of 7-Eleven and McDonald's, and then hook into the frontage road
A
to
single
skip
frontage.
those lefts.
That'd be big time.
That would be a big.
Well,
mean,
and I
that-
remember.
That's the early design ideas to handle traffic. Who knows
I
whether
remember
that's
we
a
threw a
reality.
lot of things around, and I remember after that meeting, looking at, I was remembering that the left turn going to the frontage road is always very congested, and we were kind of trying to figure out, is the Fourth West one really congested? And it really is. It really, really is. So the double turn on both there and the frontage is actually
Yeah.
pretty worn.
And I think that, those will be the interim fixes till the single point
Until that
interchange is
single point.
constructed.
Yeah.
Thank you for the
I
update.
timed it
Yeah.
yesterday.
That just seems to be like the
Took me 9
big
minutes from when I exited I-15
you know,
to get to there.
congested area every time you drive that way.
And nothing from the council to report. They did approve amended plat for legacy land, switching some easements on the subdivision. That's the subdivision north of UDOT sheds. But it didn't have to come to the commission. It was just a simple plat amendment.
Got it. Okay.
To, like, Maverick.
Yeah.
What's that, though? Like, it was-
So last item on our agenda are our minutes from our September 25th meeting. So we will do this in the regular order, page by page. Let me know if you have any changes as we go through. Any changes to page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4?
I have a change on page 4. On line 29, it says Commissioner Wright stated she is not opposed to multifamily development in general. However, she is holding to the desire to support locally owned commercial. I just wanted to, and then it says she said she's not in favor of including section 5B. I just wanted to include the language. Commissioner Wright stated she is not opposed to multifamily development in general throughout the city. And then it says, however, in this area, she is holding to the desire to support locally owned commercial. Just so that it's just clear that throughout the city, I'm not opposed to multifamily, but in this particular area, supporting that locally owned commercial. Just a
Okay.
little bit clarify.
Any other changes to page 4? Page 5, Chair will entertain a motion.
I move to accept the minutes of the November 25th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting as amended.
A second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?